All right, we'll get started here. I love the Pacific Northwest. I was grew up about 450 miles north of here. They have new legislation in Canada about the word sorry, believe it or not. You cannot be held culpable in an automobile accident for having said sorry for it. That's a fact, because they say sorry way too much. I'm a senior cloud architect and a team lead for a DevOps tooling team at Infor. Infor is a large SaaS company, has a lot of different products they bought over the years, and they were the first company to say we're taking everything we have to the Amazon cloud. We also have the honor of having the most Windows instances of any company who is hosting in Amazon. We're about 50% Windows and Linux, so the team I work on and lead has to be dual in their skill set. And I've been doing software deployment automation since 1990. Seems like a little bit of a far out call there. Anyone guess then what I was doing in 1990? Desktop administration, because on the desktop we had to have automation almost like 2 years after the machine started hitting the desktops, because the ratio of admins to machines was just too large. You had to be automating right away. And so now that cloud has scaled that high, of course, it's a really hot thing for all segments of the market. So I just want to go through and ask everyone here a few questions. So how many of you have companies that have some sort of formal architecture that says you can't grab packages from places like Chocolatey or PowerShell Gallery for one reason or another, security or availability? Okay. At my company, we have a lot of auto-scaling set up for fault tolerance and resilience, and that's a policy we have too, because that scaling can happen at any time of the day, and so we can't take a hit by being dependent on that kind of thing. How many of you already created a Chocolatey package of your own? Okay, fewer. How many have used Chocolatey packages? Oh, there we go, there we go. How many of you have packaged a PowerShell module? Okay, so what we talk about today, even if you don't end up making packages at some point, if your company has a policy where you're going to bring those inside, you're going to probably have to be curating packages in order to bring those inside. And so that's the main thing we'll be talking about, is setting up a repository, why and how, and bits about how to start getting curating those packages. And how many of you have a product deployed already, a repository product or a repository server? Okay, quite a few. Great. All right, we're going to jump right into some code. So on the machines that I'll be working on, or the virtual machine I'll be working on, I didn't have time to sit here and have us watch the products being installed. But what I do have for you is this code, along with the underlying packages, will let you set up the 3 major products on one machine on different ports. I actually maintain the package for Nexus and Artifactory. And then the package I have here for ProGet is a custom one, because at times I've had problems with the ProGet package that has been in the Chocolatey repository. So I'll just show you that they're actually running. So we have Nexus here, ProGet here, and Artifactory here. We're going to be dealing in Nexus throughout this presentation. I'll just make a few comments about the products. Nexus and Artifactory started on Linux, and they're now available on Windows. They are Java, so it's not really a big deal to put it on both platforms. ProGet started on Windows, and they are now moving to have a Linux offering as well. Compared to the other things you might see, like a little bit of code that can set up a PowerShell Gallery for you, or a standalone Chocolatey server, or a standalone NuGet server, these products all support a lot of formats. And so in a bigger organization, you might be able to get more gravity around getting a server if you don't have one, or a service, if you're able to rein in some of those common needs. So if you have teams making Linux software or Java software, they can use those repository technologies with these products. All right, so you'll be able to run that code. All this code will be available afterwards on the speaker portal, or the Sketch app. So we're going to take a look here at this NuGet org proxy, and you can see that I have no packages in it. So if there was any packages here, we'd see a list of them. Then on my machine, I'm going to run this little bit of code to list packages off of that same feed. As soon as PowerShell wakes up here. Oh yeah, go to So we're going to list the packages on that feed, and you saw there was none. So in theory, we should get a list of no packages, but instead we get the one that we asked for. And the reason is a proxy feed allows you to point your feed forward to some other location, and then whenever you reference packages on that, it pulls them through. So we can see here we now have that package. Because we only listed it, we only got its metadata, so the metadata got cached locally. If we had actually installed it, it would have pulled the whole package. We can see here that it hasn't actually pulled the whole package to the local server. So that's the idea of a proxied feed. And if you don't have a strict curation process, this can give you a lot of the benefits of curation without actually curating. Now, we're going to advocate that you should actually be curating, but here's some of the things it gives you. Service availability, so if you have that internal service set up properly, then any packages that have ever been pulled through, if there's a problem with the feed you're pointing at, then you're not going to experience that problem. You can obviously scale up the size of that service if you want to whatever size suits your automation needs. Also cost, in our case, we're completely in the cloud, so if we traverse out into the internet 5,000 times for the same bits and pull them across, we're going to pay each time. So you can reduce your bandwidth cost if you're in the cloud or on some other situation where you pay for bandwidth. And then you can also keep packages around as long as you want, even if they're really old and dusty. I'm sure you have no application teams that have really old software kicking around. I'm sure that never happens. My last employer, I had to package up VBScript 6 Enterprise, and I got that thing to be quiet and be in a package. And I let everyone know, I think this software installer is older than some of the interns we hired this year. So yeah, there can be some old software out there. You should know this is not full curation. We'll talk a little bit about the differences. And in the case of Chocolatey, whenever the installers are not inside the new package, then you're not getting that cached. You're just getting the new packages themselves cached by this technique. So it's not a complete solution, but it might offer some interesting alternatives for some of you depending on your situation. So let's take a quick look at a couple slides. We already went through you. Oops, I'm on the wrong. We'll talk a little bit about free open source benefits and challenges. And really they mirror, for packaging, they really mirror open source software benefits and challenges if you're actually grabbing software and compiling it into software that you as a company make. They're very, very similar. So some of the benefits include that the open source stuff is a very good source of starter packages. It helps you to get started with the technology and the framework. Many are directly usable and maintained, very well maintained, so updates come out frequently. In some cases, the updates are automated or even provided by the Chocolatey team. They provide certain packages themselves. It can be a great source of packaging automation patterns. If you have some challenging thing you have to do in a package and you don't know how to do it, you can reach out to the community and most likely you'll get someone pointing you to a few template packages that you might want to take a look at because they know that it does something similar. In the case of Chocolatey specifically, you have some automated QA and virus checking that goes on for you. It's not a full-on guarantee that those packages can't have bad content, but it's a lot better than the other repositories that don't have any such thing. Some of the challenges, if you're used to scripting installers yourself, you have to do a lot of customization. The Chocolatey packages don't frequently show a lot of interface for you to do a ton of customization. You can pass some command line parameters through to the underlying installer, so if you know how to automate that, you can create a very creative command line that would do some of that for you. But we'll talk a little bit about making your own packages to customize existing packages. QA test and targeting and variability. So as with free open source, anytime someone's making a package, they're making it for their own purposes and sharing it with you. So a lot of times they're only testing on the platforms and the methods that they use to deploy that. So a good example is a system account. You may deploy under some sort of software delivery mechanism that uses a system account, and the package that you decide to consume has not been tested in that manner. So you have to make sure that it's tested in the ways that you need it to be. Timely updates, some of the packages are not well maintained and some have been abandoned, so you might find situations like that. Also, the platform target testing that does go on generally is targeting very recent operating systems. So if you have a Server 2008 stack, you better go ahead and test that package because a lot of packagers aren't building their package to be robust on Server 2008. And then packaging security is a really big one. Anytime we bring in external code, whoever does that process needs to take responsibility for doing some type of security review to make sure there's not some bizarre code in there. pulling down a certificate or some other nefarious thing that it could be doing. So those are the kind of things that you will have to screen for when you start curating. So the curation of public packages, you get control over security, control over quality, making sure it will work in the circumstances you need it to work in. You get to guarantee availability because you have your own repository and you can make sure that it runs as reliably as you need it to be. You'd probably be challenged to meet the same reliability as some of the public repositories, but you do have full control over that. You can improve performance because you can make that service as big as you want, reduce your costs. And then change management. In addition to keeping older software around longer if you need it, you can start to do some creative things like only curate official versions you've adopted. So there might be 50 versions of Chrome out there, but as a company, you've only ever reviewed and adopted 3, and so that's all that appears in your repository for use within your company. So we can take a look at a little more code here. We're going to configure this machine to do curation. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into Nexus and create a couple new feeds. And once I log in, the only evidence that I'm logged in as an admin is this little gear here. And I'm going to go up and create a repository. When we hit Create Repository, we see all the types, and then in parentheses, there's some subtypes. It's probably not very easy to see. So the subtypes, we already talked about proxy. Hosted is simply creating a feed on this server where all the packages will be. And then group is interesting in that you can take multiple feeds and consolidate them into one, into kind of a virtual feed. Most of the other products have these same kind of concepts as far as the type of feeds they support. Behind the scenes, all of the ones that we talked about, PowerShell Gallery, NuGet, and Chocolatey, use NuGet technology on the back end and have different clients. And so when you pick a repository, you're going to pick a NuGet repository. We'll also see that we can kind of mix and match clients that weren't intended for the back service to do some hacking and get certain results that we want to get out of the packaging experience. Okay, so we're going to do curated Choco. I'm going to take my retention policy and say allow redeploy. If you have a feed you're creating for software that's made inside of your company, one of the ideas of packaging is that versions should be immutable. So if you recompile a package, it should have a new version number, never the same one, and re-upload it. And that's why that setting's there. If you want to strictly obey that methodology, it enables it by just saying you can never reload the same or upload the same version twice. And then we'll also do curated PS Gallery. So now we have those two repositories, and if we've done everything right, we'll be able to list. We're going to list with Chocolatey Client, and Chocolatey Client will tell us 0 packages if we're getting a good connection. So we know that we've got the feed set up right, and we've got the right URL. You can also copy the URL from within the user interface here instead of trying to guess it or fat finger it. Also, we're going to mess with our sources. So package managers by default will install a source that points to their public repository as the default. This is for your convenience, but if you're curating packages, you usually don't want anyone pulling anything from there. So in your machine, you would remove that source, and in all your production machines, you'd remove that source. In production machines, it's also important so you don't accidentally take packages from there or dependencies from there. So if you curate a bunch of packages and then you leave that feed out there, it's possible that with the right command, it's not going to take the packages from your feed, but from the public repository, and you've just basically nuked all the benefit of curating. So what I'm going to do is remove the default Chocolatey source, and then I'm going to add back my own source. I name it Chocolatey so that anybody who's just at a quick glance doesn't realize what's going on. They don't start messing with the sources. Rob can get after me if that causes production problems with Chocolatey, because I don't know if it does. Oh, thank you. There we go. And then we're going to register an API key so that we can push to this repository. It's a form of authentication. First, we have to tell Nexus how to talk NuGet API keys. So we simply add it to our list and save it. Cool thing about Nexus is there's no server restarts when you change configuration settings. It just takes them almost every setting you can set. It takes it automatically. And then I have to go get my own API key. In Nexus, I can go get the same API key again and again. Some products with API keys, you only get to see them once, and you have to grab them then, or else you have to regenerate a new one. With Nexus, we can just go list it. And so I'm going to register this API key, and now I will have a new source, and that source has my new location, and then the API key was registered, so now we can push packages to it. The next thing we'll do is set up Visual Studio Code as a curation environment. So I like to keep my tooling simple and lean, and so I figured out a way that we can do our curation 99% inside of Visual Studio Code. Most of this stuff I've already run so that I wouldn't have dependencies on pulling stuff off the network, and so that we can keep moving along a little quicker. But I'll explain what's been done. So Zip Explorer has been installed as a add-in to Visual Studio Code, and that lets me look inside of zip files. And you may have already heard already that new package files are simply zip files renamed. They got a few other details about the structured information that's inside that is part of a standard. But basically, if you rename them to zip, you can just pop them open with the zip utility. Then I also installed Virustotal Uploader so that I can upload stuff to Virustotal, and I also installed Instead, which is a very lightweight MSI editor, so I can peek inside of MSIs if you're familiar with MSI. Then we also added this Windows Explorer context menu, which will let me get to the context menu items added by these two automatically. One thing I do need to configure is to tell Visual Studio Code that a new package is equivalent to a zip file. So I will go into my settings, and we'll search in settings for extensions or associations, and we'll copy this over to our settings, and then I will add the one string to say new packages are the equivalent of zip. And now Visual Studio Code is ready to be our curation workstation. And then we're going to do a little bit of curation. Now, when you're actually doing curation yourself, I advise that you use a virtual machine. You make sure that its package cache is clean, and then you can just install packages and work with them. One of the reasons is if you just work with one new package that has no dependencies, it's not really a big deal. You pull it down, you work with it, you push it up to your feed. As soon as you get into dependencies, though, you end up pulling down more packages. And especially if you end up doing NuGet packages, curating NuGet packages, they can have a lot of dependencies. There's at least one package out there I know of that has over 150 dependencies it pulls down. And we're not just talking about this package depends on 10 things. We're talking about a tree, dependencies upon dependencies. And so that can be pretty challenging to try to humanly go through and figure out all the packages you're missing. So it's just simplest just to install the packages. Dependencies get resolved, they get installed, and they get cached. And so then you can use that information to start curating them without a lot of headache of what to load. So I'm just going to start up another copy of Visual Studio Code against my Chocolatey cache. And in the case of Chocolatey, I'm going to see all the raw files here as well. So it's pretty easy to curate them directly. I can look at them. The new spec file is here as well. And then if I want, though, I can go ahead and directly curate the new package with the Zip Explorer. So once I open it in Zip Explorer, get the same view down here, and we can also get the syntax highlighting and everything. There is a special Visual Studio Code extension out there that says it's for new spec file, or new package files, but all it does is show you the metadata only, and it shows for some reason it seems to convert it to YAML, and so that's not actually what's in the package. So instead, if you want to look inside of new packages directly, use the zip extension. In the case of Chocolatey too, we have the installers that many times are not inside the new package. So to curate that, we can simply open up the temp directory, assuming that you cleaned it out ahead of time or cleaned it out on your VM snapshot, and you can dig through here to find those files. They'll be generally by package name, and this is a simplistic approach. You can get more in depth with it if you get additional tooling. In the case of Chocolatey, Chocolatey for Business has a lot of really nice features for doing curation and bringing packages internal. But here I can send to Virustotal, and I can also install it or open it with inst.ed and look around in the MSI if I'm concerned about what contents it might have. So after I've done my curation, I've looked through this code. In the short time we have, I can't tell you everything you might look for in the code, but you need to look through the actual PowerShell code. Hopefully the MSIs you're getting from trusted sources and they're signed, and so you don't have quite as much concern about pouring through MSI or learning every feature of MSI in order to scan it for bad code. Then after we do that step, we can go ahead and simply recurse through our entire cache and push those up to the feed. So at this point, we've curated a set of packages and we want to put them up in our feed. Then we just look through that whole cache for all the new packages and push them up. We can go look at Nexus and see this in process. I don't want to see that. I haven't seen that before. It says they're going up, so let's try restarting the web interface. Okay, so there's our packages in process being uploaded right now. So that's how you would curate chocolatey packages. I'm going to talk a little bit about PowerShell module curation. Now, when I was preparing this demo, I went through what would be the standard workflow for doing PowerShell curation. I had some things I didn't like about it, but then on top of it, it turns out it doesn't seem like I can use save package unless I'm pointed at the actual PowerShell gallery. And we were told not to take dependencies on the internet for our sessions. So I'm going to walk you through what this script would be and kind of the workflow that would be the normal workflow and tell you about some of its challenges. And then we're going to look at some NuGet foo that will hack that and make it a little bit simpler. So with package management, it's more fussy about its sources. It wants all sources to be registered, which is kind of a security feature. When you go ahead and curate, I always create a special curation folder. But the other thing we run into is you're supposed to use save module to download a module and then be able to look through it. And then you have to use an install module because when you have dependencies, if you just do one module, you could do it that way. But when you have dependencies, publish module seems to be more designed for a person who's publishing their own modules because it's kind of not very smart in a couple ways. One way is it wants the packages installed so it can upload them from installed packages. So you end up having to do a save module and an install in order to get all the files you need. The second thing is it's not smart about dependencies. So save package goes, oh, you need these dependencies, let me install them in reverse order, go through the whole tree, and I save them in a folder for you. Then when you do publish package, if you publish the top level package, it goes, hey, my dependencies aren't in the feed yet, I can't do this. So that would leave you rifling through them all to find out the reverse order to upload them in. So if you do use this workflow, one thing that I devised here is that because we saved those package files and the dependency tree would have been processed for us in reverse order, we now have a set of folders with date timestamps that tell us exactly the reverse order that we can push them back into the repo for. So at least if you do use this particular workflow, you can just do this one command and it'll push all the packages up for you without you having to figure out that order. And if you have time, you can put in a pull request for publish module to be more curation friendly. So how are we going to slice and dice this with a little bit of NuGet? So NuGet itself is interesting because first of all, it doesn't require an install. It's one single file. You can pull that off of one place on the internet. The current version is always sitting in a specific URL that you can just pull. It's not fussy about registering sources before using them or even pushing to them. And it doesn't clean up the new package file. Save module ends up cleaning up the new package file so you don't have that original one easily available. So what I'm going to do here is we will create a new place to curate to. And let me just see what our repositories look like. Okay, it doesn't matter because it's not going to bother me about that. NuGet exe, I happen to know it's in a different place on my system already because of something I was doing in package management. So I'm going to copy a copy of it to this folder. And then I'm going to install the Azure package, which has a dependency with a dependency with a dependency. So it kind of emulates a bit of a tree. So it's more complicated than simply one package depending on another. It's a little bit bigger package, so it'll take a little while to come down. And then while that's cooking, I'm going to go grab that API key that we grabbed earlier. We'll need it for the push. So Azure is still coming down, but I'm going to go ahead and fire up our curation session anyway, because we'll be able to see whatever is there already, or as soon as it's done, it'll pop it up for us. So now I'm in this folder where it just downloaded the packages and extracted them. So if I go through here, I can see in plain file system the files. I could submit these to Virustotal once again if I wanted to. And then I can also, if I want to, dig through. It'll have the new package in here as well. I probably spun by it. Oh, I went to subfolder, sorry. So the new package is right here. So you then do your curation. And then once you're done your curation session, to push that back up to the repository, we use this simple command line, once again, iterating through all of the folders to find those packages and push them up. I haven't dug under the covers enough yet with publish module to understand if it's recompiling the packages versus pushing the new pegs that might be in the cache. If it is, it's quite expensive. The normal way you're unpacking the file and installing it, so that big Azure module would have to be undone twice. And then when you push it, it's going to have to pack it all back up. This way, we just get that new package down, we do our curation, and we can shove it back up. And if we go look in our repository, we can see that those packages are now available in our local server. So we're going to shift gears a little bit from curation to some interesting things you can do when you do have your own repository. One of the things you can do is create packages that do the settings for you. So I mentioned how there's not usually a lot of rich settings exposure within the average package on Chocolatey. PowerShell Gallery, this doesn't apply as much because it's just PowerShell modules. There's not any configuration involved. And so what you can do is if you keep a separate package, what you might do is you might like pull the Procmon package, like in the case of what we're going to talk about here. And you're like, oh, hey, you know, I want to customize Procmon with a few settings, and I'd like to add some filters that I use a lot. Well, you might edit that package, and now you have this separate package. And then the next time Procmon package is updated, and you're like, oh, I want to adopt that, you either have to edit your custom one or recurate and re-customize. If you keep your customization packages separate, then you can keep curating that base package in without having to play with it and snowflake it. The other cool thing is you might be able to apply multiple customizations to one thing. So like let's say you have 5 or 6 Procmon filter sets that you use. You could make it so you apply 3 of those packages to Procmon. You can also upgrade the settings or change them by forcing upgrading that package, but leaving the base package in place. And then finally, it's very likely, and I know in the case of Procmon, it is absolutely the case that your customization package might be fine for multiple new versions of the package. So if you don't bind those two tightly, if you keep them separate, it's a best practice in packaging to keep the config separate from the binary installs, and then you have this flexibility in how you use the two. So this particular package, it might even be useful to you. It's one that I used to use in a course where we had about 30 Procmon filters for doing reverse engineering of an installation. So you run a setup exe or a MSI under Procmon, and then you use these filters to analyze that trace and start isolating, does it have printer drivers? Does it have this weird thing, that weird thing? And we used to use this a lot when we were doing package virtualization, because virtualization used to cut off a lot of those endpoints, and you had to know, we do have a critical dependency on one of these endpoints, it's going to get sliced off by virtualization. But it's just helpful to look through really quickly and see. Procmon traces can be pretty confusing, but so these can be really helpful to help you get through it quickly and see what's going on. So I'm going to change back to my previous folder. And then we're going to, I have that new package sitting in this folder with us, so I'm going to push it up to my curated feed. And then on this next line, you notice something a little bit odd. We have 2 source locations listed here. So when we install this, I'm also going to be showing you the concept of a cross-feed dependency resolution. So my package requires Procmon package, but it's not in the same feed with me. It's in this other feed, which is my offline Chocolatey repository feed. And so it's going to be able to resolve that dependency across. So you can do things like keep your customizations separate from the regular packages. You could even do something like create a feed that only has your customizations and pull the packages from Chocolatey if you wanted to with cross-feed dependency resolution. So, oops, I did a highlight. Bad idea. And so now it's going to figure out, okay, you want this package. Oh, wait a second, that package has got a dependency. Dependencies are always installed first, all the way up the tree if there's a whole bunch of them. So it's going to install Procmon, and once it installs Procmon, it'll install the filters, and we'll take a peek at that when it gets done. In the meantime, we'll take a look at a couple more slides here. This slide is just intended to help you sell packaging. So if you don't have packaging at your company, and a lot of times if people have a Windows heritage, they don't quite understand packaging, and so your boss might be like, well, you've already automated those setups already. Why do you now need to do automation to put them inside Chocolatey just so you can run them in the same place again? I mean, how's that add any value? And so the secret sauce is to talk about yak shavings, or how many times you have to do this complicated thing of composing a setup and getting it into some sort of orchestration system. So heaven knows Windows has a lot of installation formats. These are just the ones used by Microsoft. Under the app exe over there, that kind of installer type, there's about 100 different technologies that might actually be under the covers. And so you have all of these, and then you have a bunch of orchestrators that might need to be serviced. And these orchestrators could be CI/CD types, or it could be traditional IT automation like SCCM. Could be cloud stuff, CloudFormation, Azure automation. You end up having to build and tweak little scripts to interface each of these setups with each of these different systems. So you get a lot of yak shavings. We have a permutations problem. And it'd be nice if we could just have one system to manage everything, but that's not usually the reality, right? We can't necessarily get all on the same page in a huge company, or if you do, then you have an acquisition, and it's not going to make sense to rip out whatever management system they have and put in yours just for the sake of consistency. So a lot of times we don't have control of the diversity on the top. So if we use something like Chocolatey, we end up encapsulating those setups in a common API framework, and then we end up presenting to these orchestration frameworks in the same way. And so you end up with a dramatic reduction in how many times you have to shave the yak for the same piece of software, because you have a very predictable API. And in reality, it could be less than a reduction. You could have less than 11, because if 3 or 4 of these systems install using the system account, and you're always testing your packages under the system account, and it works great, then there's a good chance you don't have to test each one, provided it provides the right parameters to the package to configure it for the target environment. So that's one way to sell that. Also, internal repository as a service. I did this at a previous employer that was also a software as a service company. We stood up Nexus, and then we had all kinds of packages we could put on there. We even did some packages we needed internally and contributed them to OSS. If you work for a software company, they're making their own artifacts, right? They compile their software into something. Sometimes it makes sense for them to turn those into full-on packages. Sometimes it doesn't, but when it does, you can service them. We then had a secure HTTP egress of that server onto the internet, and now we could service all of these environments. And in that case, we had all but hypervisors. So we had multiple isolated cloud environments. We had multiple types of clouds. We had real hardware, remote offices, managed and non-managed, and then we even had self-hosted customers, and we never got to the point where we could tell them, hey, here's the package feed, go ahead and use it, because a lot of times they had snowflaked their environment. But if we had that situation, you could even expose it to self-hosted customers. It allows you to hit some of the common managed scenarios, which is really cool, but what I got excited about was servicing non-managed scenarios. So in our case, they didn't want to pay for Chef on every developer workstation when we were just going to use it once to build the workstation. So by having it in packages, we were able to just create a nice orchestrating PowerShell script and be able to drop all those packages on a developer workstation without paying for the sometimes expensive clients that are required for these managed scenarios. And then, of course, curation is what we've been talking about. One final thing on concepts. I also, when we did this project, I realized over time that if we encapsulated not just our software, but our automation into packaging artifacts, we could have control of what I call our automation logic layer. So somewhere in here you do the orchestration, right? Do this package, then this package, oh, check this, oh, take this parameter and now put it into that package. And so we had environments that we needed to target, and they roughly came along the lines of managed and non-managed. And within managed, you might have multiple environments like dev, test, stage, prod. And then we had all these orchestration frameworks that might come into play, and they tend to divide down the delivering software, right, and setting up infrastructure. And then we had what I call the encapsulated idempotent version componentized automation. So that covers not just software, but also bits of automation that you would encapsulate. And we could pull from public sources or our own automation, and we could curate into our own as well. The main secret, though, was getting our automation logic out of that middle layer, because all those companies want you to program in their middle layer, because then you need their software. It's the thing from which everything else must be made. They want you to be tightly tethered, and it makes sense. It's how business happens, right? Especially in software. But if you take the concerted effort to push that logic down into your packaging artifacts, you can actually kind of get some insulation from that and take control. Don't just always think you got to put all that logic up there in that orchestrator. You could drive it into the package and then drive the packages with parameters. And then all those orchestrators have to do is deliver the package, drop the parameters, and boom, you're good to go. And that's a lot easier than recoding your logic. Not done yet, sorry. Okay, so I am a big fan and a big advocate of working code that samples should work, but also then they should be secure. So a lot of times you'll see demos or learning code, and it's like, okay, here we go, drop the pants on all the security. By the way, you can't do that. And then when you go to implement it, it takes you 6 months to figure out how to get it secure. So we're going to cover some of the details of getting basic security. If you were to put this server on the internet and you leave it in the mode we have it in right now, you get people grabbing your packages. So we don't want that to happen, so let's secure it. So we're going to go into Nexus, and we're going to tell Nexus, don't let just anybody in anymore. I'm going to go into Anonymous and say, no more anonymous access. So now all feeds on the server will no longer service anonymous requests. And if I try to make a request here, I'm going to get a user prompt. I need credentials. Then if we want to enable the individuals or places and people that we want, we have to start configuring security. I'm going to set up a local user. Nexus, out of the box for free, gives you LDAP synchronization. So you could set up AD and bring all your AD stuff in here and control this by doing it in AD. Some of the products, that's one of the key pay-for features is directory service integration, because it makes sense, right? You're obviously using it in a big capacity if you want to hook it up to a directory service. So we're first going to go into roles. We have to create a role. And we'll just say repo group. A role or a group are basically the same thing for our intents and purposes. One thing that I intensely dislike about Nexus is its permission model. If we wanted people to have admin to these feeds but not to the server, we'd give NX all, and that would give them all administrative capabilities through the feed interface but not through the GUI of the app. I'm going to go down, though, to NX repository, and then I don't want to give these admin permissions. I have to keep going through this kind of class hierarchy until I get to view. Now, if it was okay for me to give view permissions to all feeds, to all people, I could use these ones here with the star.star, because the feed names normally appear there. I'm going to do explicit ones just so that you can see how you'd boil it right down to the most detailed level. So if you have groups that don't want, hey, we don't want them to be looking at our packages, you can enable that by having per feed level granularity. And that's another potentially for pay feature on other products is feed level permission granularity will cost you. So we're going to go in, and now we're down to curated Chaco. So the permissions get very literal. And I'm going to say curated Chaco browse. And I've already learned that these are the two I need in order to install packages. And then we'll find curated PS gallery and do read and browse. I'm now going to create my role. You can also do some nesting there if you want to. We're now going to create a new user. What's a real email address, or at least one that passes the... I'm going to do just for demos. And we want the user to be active. And we want to add them to that group we just made. So created that local user. Let's go back to our client. And in the case, okay, so we're going to list the feed here. And then we'll be prompted for our credentials. This gets messed up at first, I don't know why. And boom, now I can list the feed. So I have credentials to that feed. If we listed the top one, even if I typed in my credentials, it wouldn't let me in because I never gave permissions to that actual feed. Then let's take a look at what that looks like under package management because it operates a little bit differently. Well, actually, first what we're going to do is that would kind of suck for automation, right? To have to type it in every time, so that's not cool. So in the case of Chocolatey, we're allowed to cache our credentials. So I'm going to remove the source that we had there and re-add it, and you can see here now I have credentials on the end. In the case of Chocolatey, those credentials are now being cached locally. And if I do a list, I'm going to receive the list of packages. Or I'm sorry, that's my source list. First, I want to show you that it is indeed encrypted, that password. So the password is encrypted right here. So it's a pretty safe operation. And then we're going to list the package feed. And so without providing credentials, it now lists a feed. Now, with package management doesn't want to cache passwords, supposedly a security feature, right? But you got to be careful because if you can safely cache a password, although someone has to hack that box to use it, the antithesis of never caching it means you've got to constantly handle that password. Go get it from a secure source, handle it securely in your code, and use it every time you want to use it. So there's a bit of a trade-off here in terms of being able to cache or not cache. I'm going to unregister the current PS gallery, and then I'm going to grab my credentials, or I'm going to let it grab my credentials. Oops. And we're going to do repo. Oops. Let's make sure that. No. Okay, so now we have that cached. Now I'm going to register the repository, and you're all going to go, oh, look, there's credentials. It's going to cache the credentials. He's wrong. It's not. It wants to validate the feed and make sure it can connect to it, so it needs the creds just to validate it to put it in locally. So it's not actually using those creds every time now afterwards. It's only using them for the operation of actually registering that package source. So if I try to view it without credentials, I'm going to get a prompt or a bomb, get a bomb, and then if I use it with the credentials, we should get the proper view. It's a little bit dodgy, slow today. Okay, so that's how you would secure those feeds and then access them from the clients once they're secured. There's a couple other things here that we won't have the time to go through. I'll just quickly talk you through these. This piece of code, it's just a little function that allows you to use package management on machines that are, allows you to install PowerShell gallery content on machines that don't have package management. So Server 2012 R2, you might have a lot of that, and you want to get a couple modules down. You're like, I can't upgrade to PowerShell 5. It's going to roll over these guys' stacks that aren't expecting a new version of .NET or a new PowerShell. This code will simply use NuGet. It first of all dynamically fetches NuGet, and then it'll use NuGet to go out there and grab whatever module you asked for, and NuGet automatically expands it like we saw, and then it copies it to the right location. So in my case, all I really wanted off of Server 2012 R2 is I wanted Pester on there like I have everywhere else. And so this would avoid having to upgrade the whole stack. Those of you who work in software as a service, you know that some of these stacks, if you tell them, hey, we want to change something fundamental about the build, they have to take a couple sprints and make sure that that's cool. And so you get a lot of pushback, first of all, and second of all, it does take them a lot of work to move forward on runtime. So you have to be careful how you burden them. The other thing, finally, is encapsulating source for Chocolatey. So this is a simple curation method where you saw how we did the Chocolatey curation. Well, the Chocolatey curation, we could have also just grabbed the MSI or the installer at that point, dropped it in the folder where we were curating the new package, deleted unneeded files, make a quick change to the actual Chocolatey install, and recompile it and put that, say, Chrome inside the new package. And then that way, within our organization, we're not having to have a separate hosted feed. Chocolatey for Business does this for you simply and easily, but this is the poor man's method if you can't get to Chocolatey for Business. A couple notes. If you want to be notified when this code gets posted to the speaker deck, I might also do those last two demos as videos and put them up, so you can email subscribe at cloudywindows.io. This is where I post all the stuff about how I make Windows work better in the cloud. We're getting to where the newer versions of Windows are designed for the cloud, but 2012 R2, or if you go back further, it can be challenging. This will be up in that GitHub location. I also have a Chocolatey NuGet course that I did for Pluralsight a while back. Even though it's a little bit older, it didn't go into too many particulars about Chocolatey features, so it still helps you understand the general frameworking and some of the things we talked about here. And then finally, if you want more package management courses or content, let me know that. This kind of content, sometimes you kind of have to be a little further along the line to getting into a place where you're actually actively pulling these packages in and using them. So reach out to me on any of the places too you saw on the first slide as well, Twitter and other places. So thanks for your time, and if you have any questions, look me up.